Good afternoon, everyone. If you could come on in and take your seats, we're going to get started. Well, good afternoon. Buenas tardes. It's great to welcome you to the second annual Student Success Conference. My name is Paul Dosal. I have the honor to serve as the Vice Provost for Student Success. And on behalf of President Genschaft and Provost Ralph Wilcox, I want to thank you for taking time out of your schedules to be with us today. This is a special kind of conference in that, aside from hearing an engaging and inspiring speaker, we're also going to be asking you to have a conversation later on today about different topics. We want to use this occasion to advance our student success movement. We want our time together, in other words, to be productive, to learn about innovative practices in student success so that we can implement them and assist you in developing today 6 best practice documents. So you all have some work to do today at your tables. We also made a special effort this year to bring together equal numbers of faculty, staff, and students, which made the job of recruiting people for this conference very difficult for the staff and the organizing committee. We didn't want to just throw open the doors, and I'm sure had we done so, we would have attracted a huge crowd to hear our distinguished speaker. Yet we wanted to advance the student success movement by bringing different people together. We don't always want to speak to the same choir about the same topics. We want to advance the student success movement, and we learned from our experience last year where we had an overabundance or representation of staff that we needed to bring in more faculty and students. And just by looking around the room, I think we've done so today. So I want to thank the faculty and the students for coming out and participating in this conference. I'm especially pleased and must acknowledge the passion and hard work of the Student Success Council, which organized this through a special committee that put in a whole lot of work to set the agenda and develop the topics and the seating assignments and all of that. What we're trying to do is spread the energy and enthusiasm of the student success movement. We want it spread even more all the way across campus. I see evidence of change every day I come to work. I see it in my own staff, but I see it in the attitudes and behavior of faculty and students. I think we have made tremendous progress, and I see, though, in the work, the collaborative spirit of the council and the organizing committees, plus the roaming ambassadors who are volunteering today and different units who have sent people to help us, that the student success movement is working. We are moving, and I want to thank all of them for putting this together. I want to point out, too, though, that the student success movement has been going on at USF for quite some time. Depends how you count, of course. One could say at least 10 years old. We might date it with the beginnings of President Genschaft's tenure here. It's been in the works, even though I only got involved directly in November 2009 with the Student Success Task Force. But that task force built on a foundation that was laid by many, many other people, many different work groups and committees that have been working on student success initiatives for a number of years. And I think we're entering a new phase in the evolution of the movement. And I often speak in terms of a movement because since I got involved at least, the effort has been mainly directed at bringing in people, getting them to change the way we think and behave. It's been about cultural change, institutional change, and all of that was absolutely necessary. But I think, too, it was also something that was characteristic of a movement in its early stages. And so what we're hoping to do in hearing from Dr. Hrabowski and in our conversations at our table is that we begin to move the student success movement into a new phase. We've done a whole lot of planning, even before the task force. We've begun to implement many of the recommendations. We've had meetings, workshops, retreats, forums. We've done so much, and I want to thank everybody who's participated in this. We produced in the Student Success Task Force a lengthy document, probably too lengthy, 160 pages, with I don't know how many recommendations. Even though we tried to narrow them down, we still ended up with 50-something prioritized recommendations. That's a lot. We threw everything out there. All right, we've been trying to do a whole lot. We've been engaging in this battle on a number of different fronts simultaneously, and I think that's wise and necessary. But as we get into another phase of implementation, I think we're going to have to focus our efforts more and target certain areas, okay? And clearly over the past couple of years, we have focused on the recommendations that came out of the task force report, institutionalizing student success as a permanent priority. We've made a lot of progress there, but I would never say that we are finished. So don't get me wrong. We will always have to think about how we organize ourselves to carry out this mission. That's an ongoing effort. In terms of changing institutional culture, that too is a long-term project. I see evidence of our success every day, but still we need to keep trying. All right, this is like a super tanker starting to turn, and it's turning, but it's going to be a long time. But once it starts turning, all right, it's hard to stop it. It's going. All right, I feel confident about that. I'm optimistic about where we're going. And even in the other fundamental reform recommended by the task force, that of building our research capacity, we've done some of that. You know, we've brought in some new researchers. That's awesome, but we still need more, all right? It's like we can never have enough research capacity, so we're doing that, and even more, I'm always thinking about, well, how can we develop the capacity to act on the research and the data that we're collecting? All right, we still need to do that. All right, and I am eager to get through all of these because I know we have a great speaker in store for you. I'm trying to convey a message that it's time to move into another phase of the student success movement. And the entire program today, including the speaker, is designed to advance this movement. At the same time, go ahead, let's pat ourselves on the back. We've done a whole lot of work. All right, and that Student Success Council has funded a whole lot of initiatives. But those initiatives, and many of those are highlighted in the presentation you received in your packet, even all those initiatives don't capture what this entire university is doing to promote student success. In every unit, people are doing something, and it's wonderful to see the great energy and commitment and hard work going on in so many different units. I think we've succeeded in conveying the message. Student success is an institutional priority. It's embedded in the university. All right, and I can tell you the number of times I've had people come up to me and tell me, well, this project I'm working on, Paul, is very critical to student success, absolutely critical to the movement. And of course, they're probably wondering if I can fund this initiative, and that's why they tell me it's so important to student success. All right? Everything that we do is important to student success. Obviously, we're moving, though, into a new area where all of these things are coming together. They're mutually reinforcing. We've gained a whole lot of strength and momentum. And I think we're now at a place where we can move on and do even greater things. What lies ahead for us is more challenging, though, than what we've done. We have to assess what we've done, try to prioritize in an area of shrinking budgets. What can we do best to promote the success of every one of our students? Let's concentrate our efforts more and more. I think those are the challenges ahead. It's not going to be easy. In fact, it's going to be harder than anything we've done before. Right? Whereas before, we're pulling everybody together. We still need to all stay on board. All right? There's no doubt that we can only succeed by bringing everybody together. So it it is going to be a difficult road ahead. And though to help us along, we brought today Dr. Freeman Hrabowski, president of the University of Maryland in Baltimore County. And to introduce him and to say a few other words, I want to bring up now one of the architects of the Student Success Initiative, our Vice President for Student Affairs, Dr. Jennifer Meningo.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. If you talk back to me, I talk less. Good afternoon, everyone. It is a pleasure to see all of you here and the commitment that you have made to one of the most important priorities that the University of South Florida has, and that is a focus on student progress and success. And so I congratulate you for that commitment. I thank you for the work that's already been accomplished, and I look forward to the courage and the discipline it will take as we continue to move this initiative into an integrative part of who we are at the University of South Florida. So please join me in giving yourselves a hand for the commitment you've already made. Thank you. I get the wonderful opportunity of introducing you to our keynote speaker this afternoon, Dr. Freeman Hrabowski. And although, and this is an indicator, I believe, of the type of individual we have with us today, I was instructed very clearly to keep the introduction and his accolades short by his request. And so, since I have all of you here to help back me up, I am not doing that, because I think some of his accomplishments will give you a little bit of insight as to why this is an important visit today and how we can accomplish some of the many things that have been accomplished already in the university that he leads. So first of all, I'd like to give you a little bit of his background. Dr. Hrabowski has served as president at the University of Maryland, Baltimore County since 1992. That institution enrolls approximately 1,300 students with a full-time faculty of approximately 475. His research and 13,000 students. I do apologize. It's a little bigger than 1,300. 13,000 students. His research and publications focus on science and math education with special emphasis on minority participation and performance. He chaired the National Academy's committee that recently produced the report, Expanding Underrepresentation Minority Participation, America's Science and Technology Talent at the Crossroads. In 2008, he was named one of the America's Best Leaders by U.S. News and World Report, in which 2009, 2010, and 2011 ranked his university the #1 up-and-coming university in the nation. In 2011, US News also ranked his university 4th for the best undergraduate teaching, tied with Yale and immediately before Brown and Stanford. In 2009, Time magazine named Dr. Hrabowski one of America's 10 best college presidents. In 2011, he received the TIAA-CREFT Theodore M. Hesburgh Award for Leadership Excellence. And he has written and published 2 books, Beating the Odds, Raising Academically Successful African American Males, 1998, and Overcoming the Odds, Raising Academically Successful African American Young Woman, and that was published in 2001. As of today, announced today, Dr. Hrabowski has received the 2011 Academic Leadership Award by Carnegie Corporation. Let's give him a hand for that. This award is $500,000 for the foundational centennial academic leadership. It recognizes individuals who, in addition to fulfilling their administrative and managerial roles with dedication and creativity, have demonstrated outstanding leadership and commitment to the excellence and equity in undergraduate education. So you see, as we embark upon and continue to do the work of USF and focus on our students' success and their progress and their not only success and progress, but that not only will they be leaders here at USF, but they will graduate here and lead this world, change the world. And we talk about that often. He represents the very model of what an institution, if focused on it deliberately, can do to change the lives of students. And all those recognitions might give us a small glimpse into what he represents, but we have to realize that this is a day-to-day leadership focus that ultimately does change the lives of every student that he gets to influence. And that's exactly what we want to do with our Student Success Initiative. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Rabowski here at the University of South Florida.
Thank you very much, Jennifer. Thank you very much. I am delighted to be here. I've known your president since she was a dean up at Albany and provost when I chaired an accreditation team there years ago and have marveled at her leadership over these years. Today is a very special day for me and for my campus, and so I've gotten over 150 emails from the campus and from a lot of other places for this Carnegie Corporation Award. I also want to acknowledge my dear friend who also gets a $500,000 in the award. And would you give Eduardo Pardon a hand? I am so proud of him. It's very nice. Very, very nice. So he and I will be there in New York next week at a celebration. It'll be just great. But I can think of no place I'd rather be than here today because I've been so impressed, Jennifer, Paul, and all the other colleagues, with what you've been working to do in student success. The reason my campus received, for the last 3 years, this award, it surprised us, this up and coming, is an interesting one because all of our friends at the university are saying, so when do you arrive? You keep being this up and coming place, right? And first of all, I say we never arrive because success is never final, but the criterion for selection focuses on academic innovation, how the institution is thinking and rethinking academic programs, issues of success, academic success and performance. We are a campus that has students from about 150 countries, 13,000, 3,000 of whom are grad students, probably maybe producing 100 PhDs a year, a small number, but in science, in selected science and engineering areas and policy areas. We're very connected to the national infrastructure in the Baltimore-Washington corridor. And we have, everybody knows in my state, we have the highest percent of students in science and engineering graduating, perhaps 45%. Everybody else is below 25%. So it is an expensive education, but very strong emphasis on the liberal arts broadly. And I have to remind people that math and biology and chemistry are a part of the liberal arts also, as my humanists know. But I say that because the challenge we have faced as a young university, and we're very similar to you, is that we have had large numbers of students who have not necessarily done well in previous years. And so in the period that I have been there, first this past 20 years as president, and actually 5 years before that as vice provost, responsible for the academic experience, having served as a provost at an inner city college, is that we knew we needed to do much more to improve the performance of our undergraduates. The fact is that when you think about research campuses, yours, mine. By the way, to give you a sense of it, we are second in funding from NASA in research in the country. So a lot of really good research in the areas. We have the only Howard Hughes investigator in our state for public. So it's a good place, science. But the key is that it's much easier to talk about success of doctoral students who are serious, who are often already working, who are professionals, and to work with them in labs and wherever, than it is to talk about what's happening to freshmen or transfer students or students who are coming after having been out for a long time. Now, let me get my audience. Let me see this. How many of you in the room are students? Let me see your hands. Let me see where you are. Oh, good. Very good. Very good. How many of the students know that they're smart? If you are smart, stand up. Let me see you. Stand up if you're smart. Give them a hand. Very nice. Very nice. Okay, so how many of the students are accustomed to working, studying, and doing homework, all that together, at least 4 or 5 hours a night? Stand up if you do 4 or 5 hours between day and night every day. Give them a really big hand. Very nice. All right. Now, how many of you tell the truth? Stand up if you tell the truth. Just kidding. Just kidding. Just kidding. Just kidding. Just kidding. Some started standing. Everybody has a story. You know, I said to people earlier, we don't think of Florida as the deep South. You're like your own country somehow. You're so big, right? You know, and there's different parts of the state, right? You're so different. But I grew up, I'm in Baltimore now. Baltimore is what I call the upper South, right? I grew up in the deep South. I grew up in Birmingham. I was a child leader with Dr. King back in the 60s. I went to jail marching and everything and leading kids protesting. And so I've had just a great background in thinking about issues of justice. But it is amazing to me that stories will be remembered. Stories will be remembered. I have told this story so many times, and yet it still inspires me. My parents would tell me about their childhood experiences. My dad and mother grew up in rural parts. I was in the big city, Birmingham. My dad would say, boy, you're so lucky. Every day you have someone to take you to school. He said, when I was growing up, I had to walk 5 miles to school every day, right? I got so tired of my dad telling that story, I finally said, Dad, that's why your feet are so big. To which he responded, boy, don't you get smart with me. But my mother told a story that embarrassed me as a child, and yet I've told it now 1,000 times. She said that beginning at age 12, she had a choice of either working in a hot cotton field or working in a wealthy home, a wealthy white home. And she wanted to see how rich people lived. And what she saw that was particularly stunning was the emphasis on books and reading in that wealthy home. In her own home, there was only one book, a wonderful book, the Bible. And in her school, there were really no books. And there was no library at that time for children of color. And the woman was kind enough to say, Maggie, when you finish your work, you can go into the library, get a book, and read. And then she allowed my mother to take the book home. After a while, my mother had become so immersed in this reading that when her girlfriends would say, come outside and play, she would say, no, I want to keep reading my book. And they would say, Maggie, why do you want to keep your head in that book? You can come out and play. And she had to think about this growing difference between herself and her girlfriends. And here was the difference. The more she read, the better a reader she became. And the more proficient a reader she became, the more she loved the experience. And the more she enjoyed reading, the more reading she wanted to do. The problem with her girlfriends was that they never read enough to become good enough at it to want to do it for pleasure. And when they read, she could see their lips moving and she could see the frown because they had to do it in a class. And it was at that point that she knew exactly what she wanted to do for the rest of her life, the work she always considered more noble than any other, to become a teacher. And for over 40 years, she taught. And she taught English. And so all of my life, my mother would be quoting Zora Neale Hurston. Any students know who Zora Neale Hurston was? She's from this state, from Florida, right? And in her book, Their Eyes Were Watching God, it begins, ships at a distance have every man's wish on board. For some, they come in with the tide. For others, they sail forever on the horizon, never out of sight, never landing, until the watcher turns his head away in resignation, his dreams mocked to death by time. That is the life of men and women. Hurston was talking about two groups of people in our society, and my mother was trying to make a point to me. People whose dreams become reality. Anybody in here has had some dreams fulfilled. Students, you know kids in your high school who didn't even finish high school. Kids who might have said they were going to college, but are not there. Faculty and staff, you've obviously done well. Hurston's point was this, that the difference between those whose dreams are fulfilled and those whose dreams are, in the words of Langston Hughes, forever deferred, is education. Where would we be today if we had not received an education? How many faculty and staff in the room, first, are the first in their families or first generation to go to college? Raise your hands. Look around the room. I want the students to look around the room. It is a wonderful story. Okay, students, how many of you are first generation or first in your families to go to college? Raise your hands. Here's my point. It has been an American story that the first person in the family goes and people watch to see what's going to happen. And some people are excited about it, and other people are saying you need to get a job, you need to get married, whatever. But the person does well enough to get the education, can move out of the house, and amazingly gets a car, and then younger brothers and sisters And younger relatives say, I want to be like her. I want to be like him. And so the evolution of the middle class for every race in our country has involved more and more people getting that education. The reason our nation is now saying that we must put more emphasis on not just getting people into college, but in helping them to succeed. It's not just access, but it's success, as you're talking about here, is because half the people who start in college don't graduate. And in fact, when you look at students of color, the percentages are much higher of those who are not graduating. How many of you in the room are between the ages of 35 and 70? Aha, aha. I've got good news and bad news. Which one do you want first? The bad news is you're getting old, whether you know it or not. You're getting old, all right? The good news is you look good, so it's okay. It's this Florida weather, I'm sure. You look very relaxed somehow, all right? Okay, how many of you are between 25 and 34? I've got good news and bad. Which one do you want first? The bad news, you're not as smart as we are. But the fact is, the good news is we're very jealous of you. We want to be your age, all right? But here's my point. If you're between 35 and 70, you are the most educated human beings on the face of the earth, with the exception of people in one country, Canada. We're second right now, but for that age. But if you're between 25 and 34, you've gone down to number 7. In other words, other countries we know that are increasing their numbers substantially of those getting bachelor's degrees and double A's. The big challenge we face as we get more people into college, as we work on K through 12 issues, is to figure out what do we need to do at the college level to help larger numbers succeed. When the outside world looks at colleges and universities and sees that all the money that states are putting into education, all the money in private fundraising, that only half the people are making it, they're saying, what's wrong with this picture? And the question for all of us is, what are the things we need to do? It's easy enough to say the problem is K through 12, that they're not doing what they should do. I would argue that our challenge in the academy is to look in the mirror, to create a climate, an environment in which we open our minds and look carefully at what's working and what else we might do. This notion of innovation is an interesting one. I am a true believer that the best thing we can do, whether we're students, faculty, or staff, is to keep asking questions. I. Rabi, a Nobel laureate, said that when he was growing up in New York, all of his friends' parents would ask them at the end of a school day, what did you learn in school? In contrast, he said his Jewish mother would say, Izzy, did you ask a good question today? And he said the practice of her encouraging his curiosity made him the thinker he became. So whether talking about our education of our students or our looking at ourselves, this notion of asking good questions seems to me to be a theme we should all be focusing on as we think about how to take things to the next level. What is interesting about your approach is that as I read your report, it was very clear that you have read the literature, that you are focused on best practices from empowering students. I mean, I really want to congratulate the organizers of the conference, Paul and all the others, Jennifer, that you have a large number of students here. Because I have found on our own campus and in the best places that have been more successful in helping students succeed are determined to have students as a part of the leadership groups, because students influence students. So empowering students and integrating this notion of student success into the culture and changing attitudes and values, institutional change, building your research capacity, using technology, finding ways of communicating student engagement, investing in course redesign, strengthening advising and counseling, and looking at the financial model to make sure students have the funds they need. This notion of the USF shuffle is really a great way of saying that. That speaks volumes. On every campus, and I go to a lot of campuses, you will find that large numbers of students trying to solve problems are sent from office to office. I was reading your report while I was reading an email from one of my students last night. And the student wrote this long email saying, Doc, I am so frustrated. I have been to 4 offices. I thought I was graduating. I was told by the system I had 2 courses to take, different from what my academic advisor had said. I went to the registrar's office, and they told me go back to my advisor. I went to my advisor, and she said she didn't agree. I went back to the registrar's office, and the registrar said, the person said, well, the person who handles that is out for the next week. Come back in a week. And I said, but I need to know if I'm going to graduate in December. Well, come back in a week. So I went back to another office. That person, and about 8 offices, back and forth, and he still hadn't gotten an answer. So what do you do? And this is about specificity. One of the points I want to make to you is that as we think about how you eliminate shuffle, whether it's the USF shuffle or the UMBC shuffle, and every campus has it, the first thing is it seems to me very important that we learn how to be honest about the good, the bad, and the ugly. The more secure a campus is, the more they'll say to students, we are not perfect, we have problems, we make mistakes, sometimes we're not responsive, help us to be better. And so I last night emailed my entire President's Council. I sent them a part of your statement about eliminating USF. I said, and we think it's just them. And I said, let's start calling it the UMBC shuttle. We don't want to plagiarize, so we'll give them credit somehow for the term, all right? Make sure there's a note that says Hrabowski took this from USF. So I'm giving you all credit for that, okay? And I'll make it clear that you're not trying to enhance it, you're trying to eliminate the shuffle. But, but my point is, I had amazing emails last night from people beginning to try to understand the issue. What we have been doing that's helped us a lot, this was a very unusual situation, having to do with some new staff members in several offices who had not gotten the training they needed to get, who had not gotten this orientation about what's in the culture. Because when you talk about something that becomes a part of the culture, every person understands that this is important. It should be important to all of us, faculty, staff, and other students, to support people with needs, with challenges, so that when somebody has a problem, it's not just pushing them to the next office, it's helping them figure out how to solve that problem. That can only occur if the orientation is different. So the first problem we found this morning with that was just that the fact is that several people were new, did not know what they should have done and how they should have done it, which had to do with timing for orientations. Secondly, though, there were people who literally just were not taking the time to help those students. Now, so what should be the response of people at the next level? My point would be this. We want to educate not only students, but ourselves, to help people who sometimes don't take the time or haven't thought about it to understand how would they feel if they were treated that way. Now, one of the points I would make to faculty in the room is that often when I go to campuses and we talk about these kinds of things, most colleagues are interested in their disciplines and in the coursework, but not in these kinds of issues. I would argue that the reason it's important for all of us to be involved is that to the extent that we get a reputation of helping students and being supportive of people in graduating, it is amazing to me how much more support you can get not only from your state, but from other agencies. One of the reasons we've had such success is that faculty, and I mean tenured researchers, have become owners of this issue of undergraduate student success. And the result has been millions, tens of millions of dollars of grants from the National Science Foundation, from DOE, from the National Institutes of Health, focused on training initiatives, for example. This money from Carnegie will be matched by other places where we are working to be a model of innovation and inclusive excellence. I am defining inclusive excellence as an effort to help students of all races, from all types of economic backgrounds, men and women, to excel, to succeed, to want to be smart, to work hard, to be the best. I want to refer you to several articles because I want to take time for a lot of questions. This is an article that is actually a chapter in a book entitled Toward Positive Youth Development. My colleagues and I wrote it. It's published by Oxford Press. If you look on my website, you can get it. But it's entitled Enhancing Representation, Retention, and Achievement, Academic Achievement of Minority Students. And the subtitle is A Social Transformation Theory of Change. And it has several components. One is about empowering students for student achievement, looking at everything from a group-based belief system to an opportunity role structure which involves study groups and involvement in faculty research, internships, involvement in service, to a multifaceted support system, and then empowering leadership involving faculty leaders, staff leaders, and student leaders who take ownership of this issue of achievement. Secondly, a large institutional change process which, again, inclusive excellence involving embracing diversity of all types of students, promoting academic excellence, and focusing on those values necessary for that excellence. And then a transformation of the culture, looking at the values, assumptions, and behavior of everybody, and then reflecting on the experience and assessment. What has made the difference for us is that we are reflecting and using on these problems that we have and having robust and honest dialogue about the issues. Give you one example. 20 years ago, in my first year there, we had a major minority student protest, and when I got to the issue, it was that students of color, particularly blacks and Hispanics, were not doing well in science courses. In fact, the average GPA for a student of color on my campus in underrepresented groups was about a 1.9. Now, when we asked students, when I was just there, I would say, how are you doing academically? Everybody said, I'm doing just fine. Usually, students, you know this, if somebody asks you how you're doing, if you ask somebody else how they're doing, everybody's going to say, I'm okay, right? Because students are not going to want to tell other people if they're not doing well. It was only when we began looking at the data that we saw all these people who were really hurting because they had not done as well. And often for our campus, because we are a place that produces a lot of kids who go to med school, a lot of students, minority students, had not done well. Well, the interesting point is that when we started analyzing the data, it wasn't just that students of color were not doing well, white students were not either. And so a lot of my minority kids said my campus, which is predominantly white, was a very racist place. My white students who were not doing well just said it was a very cold place. So they all had an interpretation, right? And what did my faculty say? They were wonderful people. The best students were doing okay, but they would just say students were not prepared. So we needed to have honest dialogue about the issues, about the challenges, about the level of skill students needed to make it in the first year of chemistry or the first year of calculus. Now, if you ask most scientists in the country and you say to them, well, half the students who start off in science will not succeed, they'll say that's about normal, because that's what we've all seen in America. When I chaired this National Academies Committee, nobody was surprised that only 20% of Hispanics and blacks who begin in science or engineering graduate with a bachelor's in science and engineering. Only 20%. What percent of whites who begin in science and engineering do you think graduate in science and engineering? Somebody give me an idea. What do you think? 50? Anybody else? 80? Anybody else? It's only 32%. Only 32% of white Americans who begin with a major in science and engineering graduate in science and engineering. Okay, what is the highest achieving group in our country? What race? What group? Asian American, right? We know that. Put it in perspective. What percent of whites in America have a college degree? Any idea? We give people that are 25 and older. What do you think? 55? Anybody else? 37? It's 32%. Only 32% of whites today have a college degree. And if I were to ask you from 1965, what percent of whites do you think had a college degree? It was 10%, 11%. But you didn't need a college degree in 1965 of any race to get a good job, right? Steel mills and everything else. All right, what percent of blacks do you think today have a college degree? You know, this is a very risk-adverse group, I can tell. Right? Listen, lighten up. This is about innovation. Come on, just guess. Come on. It's only 17. What do you think it was in the early 60s? It was 2. Good. You with me? All right. Okay, for today, what percent of Hispanics have a college degree? 11%. So the fastest group in our country, only 11%. We know we want to do more for all these groups, all right? And why do I tell you all that? Here's the point. Even for Asian Americans, highest achieving in our country, what percent do you think have a college degree, Asian Americans? 55%. Because many are the children of people who came here to grad school, and they remained, okay? But here's my point. So overall, 2/3 of all Americans who begin in science and engineering get wiped out. And because the number one reason they leave science and engineering is they didn't do well in the course. Now, they will tell you they liked something else better. Well, yeah, if I got an A in something else, yeah, and a C or a D in chemistry, yeah, I like that better, but guess what? I didn't do well, and you don't like what you didn't do well in, right? Now, here is the most stunning fact of all. It was a study just recently completed by Sylvia Hurtado at UCLA. She was on my committee, in this committee, that shows that the higher the SATs of the student, the more selected the university, the larger the number of AP credits a student has taken in math and science, the greater the probability the student will get wiped out of science in the first year. Let me say that again because it sounds counterintuitive. The higher the SAT, the higher the number of AP credits, the more selective the institution, the greater the probability that a student will get wiped out. And so the argument that people leave science because they're not prepared just isn't true. What is the reason that the committee from the academies found? On all of our campuses, we need to re-examine, rethink the culture of teaching and learning in science and engineering in the first year or two. Because what does NSF call science and engineering first-year courses? Weed-out courses. And we Americans have accepted the idea. Now, what does it mean? It means that only 6% of Americans who are 24 years old or older have bachelors in science and engineering. For the industrialized European nations, it's about 12%. I was hosting a visit of the president of the Korean Institute of Technology. He told me that in his country, 70% of all bachelors are in science and engineering. What is the challenge we face? To look in the mirror, to do the kinds of things you're doing here. Because what I would argue is that just as we need to look at what happens in science and engineering, we have to look across the board, across disciplines, at ways of helping more students to become engaged and to do well. And so let me give you several of the points that we have been able to make that have made such a difference. For the minority students, we started the Meyerhoff Scholars Program. When you get a chance to look on our website, and what we did was to say, this is all an experiment. And my question was this: what could we do to make our campus an institution known for excellence in producing students of all races who succeeded in science and engineering? I looked around the country trying to find any predominantly white university that could say it was having at least 10 students of color who were graduating and going on to get PhDs in science and engineering. There was not one in the nation. The historically black colleges were doing better than anybody else. They had larger numbers, and minority-serving campuses for Hispanics. By the way, do you know the name of the institution that produces the largest number of bachelor's recipients Hispanic who will get PhDs every year? Do you know who it is? Who do you think? What'd you say? Texas? No. Good chance though, but no. No. Right, by the way, I want you to get my report. It's entitled Expanding Minority Access. If you look on my webpage of the National Academies, it has the institutions for blacks and then for Hispanics. It is for Hispanics, the number one place on the mainland is Berkeley. Berkeley produces, over a 5-year period, 50 PhDs, people who got bachelor's degrees at Berkeley and went on and got PhDs. There were 50 over 5 years. Now, let me show you what's interesting. There's one place that does much better than Berkeley. It is the University of Puerto Rico. University of Puerto Rico, MIES, by itself, produces 3 times as many Puerto Rican kids who finish there and then come to institutions around the country. They produce 150 over a 5-year period. So I was on a radio program in Puerto Rico, and I made this comment, and all of a sudden the music started, this great music. They started celebrating in the middle of an interview. I said, what's going on here? I mean, people are dancing and stuff, and they said, oh, we Puerto Ricans are great in science. It was wonderful. And I had one thought. That was in Puerto Rico. Do you think I would hear that in New York? We Puerto Ricans are great in science? Culture. You get my point? Culture, that people aren't accustomed to seeing it. And it makes all the difference in the world. And so what I was working to do in my campus, my colleagues, was to figure out what could we do to help kids of color. We started with black kids because Baltimore is more still South. We had fewer Hispanic kids, and amazingly could find several faculty members who also had that question. Because any initiative that will work must have the people with the real power, the academic power, who take ownership of the issue. Not all, but some. And on any campus, our colleagues, the faculty, own the curriculum. Our faculty own instruction. Students can be supportive and staff can be supportive, administrators, but unless you have some faculty, tenured faculty, who think it's an important issue, it still is peripheral. It only becomes mainstream when our prestigious faculty say this is an important issue to this university. So finding a few, and it's not everybody means well, but some people understand this point more than others, but just finding a few people. The chair of chemistry was my only female chair, and she had come from 20 years as a professor at Hopkins Medical, and she said, Freeman, the reason I'm interested in this issue is this. She said, it's hard to get into med school, but once you get in, you almost invariably succeed. If you don't do well one year, they give you another year to finish it out. It's easy to get into science. It's hard to graduate from science. She wanted to understand why the culture of undergrad science was so weeding out in its orientation. And so we started experimenting with different approaches, stuff from Yuri Treisman, my good friend, the mathematician, who was at Berkeley, is at Arizona State now. We looked at group work and what we saw our Asian students doing as they worked. We saw that my black kids, my white kids, my Hispanic kids in groups tended to have a good time. They were talking stuff. They were just having a good time. When you get to the Asian American kids, whether they were Korean, Indian, Chinese, they were focused on the work. We saw that all over, and we said, let's see if we could take what we've learned from that group and spread it to others, and for blacks and for other groups, and whites and Hispanics. And so we began talking about cohorts of students who would help each other. The one thing that I mean, you say it in your about groups, but I can't tell you, there's nothing that's been more important besides faculty ownership than group support. And so the first group of my house were called M1s. I did not want them to be called M1s because I said M1 is a weapon, it's a gun. I said, why don't you call yourselves MS1s? My house scholars ones, right? They said, that's a disease. We'd rather be a gun than a disease. So it's funny. So a few years ago, we got up to M16s, all right? And now we're at M24s. Now, before that program, we had never had a minority student. So the first group was, we started with these black kids, and we started bringing in more Hispanics, and we brought them in, but we had never had a student of color from an underrepresented group, blacks, Hispanics, Native Americans, never had one earn an A in an upper-level science course. And when I said that to faculty, people got upset. Blacks, whites, everybody got upset with me because they said, well, you shouldn't say it. It's embarrassing to say we've never had a black get an A in genetics, for example, or in organic chemistry. And I said, well, if you don't state the problem, how can you solve the problem? You get my point? You've got to be healthy enough to say, this is an issue. It's not saying they can't do it. It just hasn't happened before. And so usually if I ask kids on campus, who are the smart black and Hispanic kids, they would say this. If a kid gets a C in organic chemistry, they're really heavy. That was the word at that time. Because the best students were getting C's, and some of them could get into med school. Because UMBC was seen as just a rigorous place. And so the expectation was just that. That's the best the kid's going to do. Not because, and so a couple of faculty said, you think we're racist? I said, no, it's not that. We tend to expect what we've seen before. We tend to expect whatever we've seen before. Here's the point to you. We said we wanted to get these students to the point, through hard work, deciding what the backgrounds had to be when they came in, quite frankly, to have a reasonable chance of doing well. And the goal was to get students to the point where they not only got an A, but where they got an A with ease and were just focused on the work itself. That was the goal. Is it possible to have a hairy and bold goal, as Collins says, that says we want to be known as a place that has super, super smart kids of all races going to the Harvards and Stanfords all the time? And people said, well, it'll take another generation. I said, well, let's just look at it. So data analysis was very important. Asking the right questions. For example, what's the minimum level of math background a student will have to have in order to have a reasonable chance of succeeding in engineering at UMBC? SATs, grades, coursework, rigor of work, attitude, and so we were studying them. So one of the messages, themes is to know the students. Another message is specificity. It's not enough to say black students because, quite frankly, turned out black kids who had been educated in other countries had gotten A's. Those who had come from Senegal or from boarding school in Nigeria, but kids out of New York or Baltimore had not. And so for Hispanic groups, my kids who come from the University of Puerto Rico are well prepared. My Puerto Rican kids out of New York tend not to be as well prepared. You get my point? So specificity, my kids who come from the Autonomous University of Mexico, again, well prepared. My Mexican-American kids out of Texas, not as well prepared. Not all, but you get my point? That you've got to look with specificity at every group and not assume you know a student because the student is one color or not. You don't know that student's background. It's very important. So understanding the stories of every student, that student's background in relationship to expectations, very important. But the community building was key. So M1s got to know each other, M2s, and then what we did was, for that program, the next group was mentored by the first group. So M1s took care of M2s, M2s, and care of, and it's all the way. So now, right now, M4s as the youngest group, the M23s are taking care of them. Taking care of them meaning kicking their butt when they're not doing what they should be doing. Making sure they get to the right courses, making sure they're studying, those kinds of things. And so students taking ownership. Now, that program worked so well, we have now done it in the humanities. We have the Drescher Humanities Scholars. We have the Linehan Artist Scholars. We have the Sondheim Public Affairs Scholars across majors. And then, when we got across disciplines, then we said, okay, let's help the average student to get connected to a group. And the question I would ask you rhetorically is, so to what group does every student here belong that will give that student support in the way that we talk about with the Posse program that some of you have seen before? Who is it among students who will come together to make sure they're commiserating, discussing issues, supporting each other, pushing each other to be the best? I'll just give you one statistic for the faculty in the room. Raise your hand, faculty in the room. Let me see faculty. Any science faculty in the room? Math and science. You'll appreciate this one statistic. Several years ago, there were only 67 African Americans in the country to get bachelors in biochemistry. 67. 22 came from my campus, and all of them went to Ph.D. and M.D. Ph.D. programs. Give my colleagues a hand for that. And so the group work, research, the same things you all are talking about, you've got all that in your report. The key will be attitudes, values, expectations, and most important, thinking and rethinking about the issues using data analysis. I have an article in one of the recent education reviews, EDUCAUSE reviews, the computing group, and it's on analytics and academic performance. And we look at how data warehousing is the name of the game for my campus. I can tell you in a matter of 3 minutes from my computer the number of Hispanic students coming out of Montgomery County schools who are interested in biochemistry who came in with a math SAT of at least 600 in a matter of 3 minutes. So before, when I would have to send questions to the institution research and wait 3 weeks to see what they said to then come back, I can get the answers quickly and then ask deeper questions. So when we come together, we understand the students' issues and trends. Then bringing students in, we can listen to their voices. One of the most effective techniques for the Meyerhoff program, for my students in general, is listening to the voices of students. I honestly believe that the wisdom you need to reshape the culture of any campus can be found by listening to voices, starting with hearing what students say about their experiences, starting with faculty and staff talking about their own stories, looking at the balance between working on the outside, for example, and numbers of credits you can take. We have what we call reality therapy. We know that for a lot of majors, you cannot work full-time and expect to get 16 credits and do well. It's not going to happen. And the way you can convince a student is to show them the trend. Over the past 500 students who tried to do what you've done, the average GPA is a 2.2. You see, so giving students that background can make all the difference in the world. You know, there are two kinds of people in the world, as I close, because I want to have time for questions. There are people who can suck every ounce of energy out of your body because they're so negative. You know those people, right? You know who they are on your campus. Some of you in this room right now, I know. Just kidding. Kinda, just kidding. But then there are other people who can elevate you and who can make you feel this is worthwhile. You know, I would argue that student success, from the point of view of UMBC and from what I've seen on many campuses, has everything to do with helping students to dream about the possibilities, to understand how becoming excellent at something and broadly educated can change the world. And most important, to have students, like those in this room, feeling this is my university. I want to make sure I succeed, and I want to make sure people around me appreciate who I am. If a student knows that you care about her, you can push her to be better and better and better. The same thing happens with faculty. Some of you in the sciences will appreciate I've served as the PI on our advanced program grant. This is the NSF Advanced Grant for the last 7 years. 7 years ago, only 12% of our faculty in STEM areas were women. Now, all of us said that couldn't be the case. We saw plenty of women over there. It turned out they were not tenure track, and they were not tenured. They were technicians. They even had PhDs, but they were not the researchers, and so they didn't have the kind of prestige. They didn't get the kind of benefits. And so we did the same thing with women faculty that we had done with students, building groups, examining our assumptions, giving them a chance to support each other, listening to their voices, evaluating the situation. And what we found was when we interviewed and did surveys of men versus women, the senior men, the old guys like me, mainly white, said everything was fine when it came to gender issues. The women, assistant through full professor, says, we have problems. They said, but the guys are nice, but we still have problems, right? You get my point? And the junior men got it. And so creating an environment where we didn't point fingers, but rather try to explore the challenges made all the difference. We went from 12% women faculty. Today, we're at 39% women faculty. Give me another big hand for that, too. And that's the women of color. Very important, very important. I close with a story about one of my students. I've told this story over and over again. We always think we know who somebody is. This was a young man who was really smart. He had been to Russia, a young minority kid out of the city. We've got kids from all over the country, but kids from Baltimore, big black guy, very positive. And I said, son, he was fluent in Russian. I said, what do your parents do? Because, you know, an American kid of any race, fluent in Russian without a Russian background, it's got to have some privilege. And he said, Doc, I never wanted to tell you this. I said, tell me what? He said, I am a ward of the state. I said, what do you mean you are a ward of the state? And I thought about it. He was telling me his parents were not in his life. And I said, tell me your story. He said, when I was 12, my father became hooked on drugs and left us. By the time I was 13, my mother was hooked. And she left me in a crack house to fend for myself. He said, Doc, I have been to hell and back. Son, how did you get here? He said, finally, after months and months, a social worker got me out of that house. I went from foster home to foster home. I finally ended up in a group home. I said, so how did you get here? He said, I remembered something my grandmother said. She said, when in doubt, when in trouble, you just have to pray and say, God, help me. And, you know, I tell this story that people are not supposed to bring religion to it, but people, you have to tell whatever it was that helped somebody make it. And it was in my books on raising smart kids, so often spirituality and religion was a part of what made it help them make it. This is a scientific approach to listening, and that made the difference. He said, I had a teacher who told me I was smart, and that if I wanted to get out of poverty, I had to study really hard. And so all I did was just pray and study. And I did well enough on the SATs. Kid ended up with math and verbal in the 1200s out of just dirt poverty. And we got him to UMBC. He didn't have the money to live on campus. He stayed in the group home. He said some days I would sleep in the library because I didn't have the money to get home. And other days I didn't have food, so I learned how to get the clean part of a tray out of the trash can. Now, by now, I'm literally, old men cry fast, all right? The older you get, the more you cry. I think just because men know they're going to die, you know, so they get, but, I mean, he's got tears, I've got tears. I could not believe on my middle-class campus there was a young man who had to go into the trash can to find food. And I thought to myself, you never know what a student has gone through to be here today. That young man at commencement had nobody there. And all of a sudden, my mama, who's now deceased, you know, your mother talks to you even after she dies, right? So it's like you know what you hear her say, and she's saying, say something about this boy, say something about it. And I got up, and I said, all of you here today have family, because families make us who we are. One of us here today, one of your own, graduating with a 3.5 in Russian literature, has no one with him today. And when I called his name, kids of all races were so shocked because this boy, Tavon, had elevated everybody else. He was always lifting other people. He never talked about himself. They didn't know his story. And when he stood, all of a sudden, he started crying like a baby. Came up and he just said, I've never felt love. And I thought about in some countries, when the kids go for the international math and science competition, as they leave the room, all the other kids rise and applaud to support that child. Well, all of a sudden, thousands of graduates got to their feet, and they applauded. There wasn't a dry eye in the place. It was like a basketball game. All these kids looking at him. That's what you're seeing, right? Yeah, you know, it was amazing. All for Tavon. Well, he went on with the Fulbright, got a grad degree in Russia. He wanted to focus on children, poor children around the world. He then went to Princeton, finished in that wonderful Woodrow Wilson program. He is now a part of foreign diplomacy of the State Department. He will change the world. He comes out of poverty to focus on poverty. Give Tavon a hand, would you please? It's such a great story. We must tell our stories. Faculty and staff, you must tell students your stories. Stories inspire. Stories tell people we overcome all the time. And so I challenge you to watch your thoughts. They become your words. Watch your words. They become your actions. Watch your actions. They become your habits. Watch your habits. They become your character. I tell my students, your character has everything to do with who you are, not only when people can see you, but what will you do when you don't think anybody's watching, when your mother's not there. So thoughts become words. Words become actions. Actions become habits. Habits become character. Watch your character. It becomes your destiny, dreams, and values. Thank you very much, University of South Carolina, South Florida. University of South Florida. Great audience. Great, let's take some questions, okay? And if somebody can give me some water, I'd really appreciate it. You know, you've got smart faces, you really do. You were going, and the students were into it. I loved it. The students were really listening. It was great. Please, some questions, and I want to make sure some students ask me some questions too, okay? Thank you so much.
So I wanted to ask about the cohorts, and particularly for our engineering college, how you've gone about actually getting those set up and getting the students to participate, because I think that would be a very important.
Yes, there are two stages. I first wanted to see, as my colleagues and I were talking, how to make sure larger numbers were succeeding by seeing if we could produce some who would be the very best. Just as we have the very best in basketball, and then you have other levels, people are looking at that, or you have the very best in entertainment or in arts or whatever. I don't think we sometimes think about the idea that any university should have its one group would be those who are really the hardest workers, the very best, to figure out how you can make them as good as possible and to make them the examples that you want others to try to emulate, right? So we start, the Mile Halls are like the gold standard. Now, the good news is a lot of kids will come in and won't have that background, but if they work with the Mile Halls and they work hard enough, they can get into the Mile Hall. Of all races now. We have students of all races there, students who are interested in understanding underrepresentation as well as science and engineering. So that's one approach, okay? So having a small group to experiment with, to figure out what you do can make a big difference. Because once we develop strategies that work for that group, we have now replicated in other programs. For example, we have cohorts in our Chemistry Discovery Center. When you go to the UMBC website, look under our CDC, it stands for Chemistry Discovery Center. And what you'll see is that all first-year students in chemistry are in group work. We have groups of 4, randomly assigned. They are with technology on the table. We've got furniture and rather than giving them the theories, we teach them a process of asking the right questions so they can discover the theories. And we use actual problems from some of the biotech companies on our campus. We have 75 companies on campus, started by our faculty and Hopkins faculty in biotech and IT areas. And so literally, if you come to the Chemistry Discovery Center, it sounds almost like a party. When the NSF people come in, they say, this isn't chemistry. It's very funny, you know, first year chemistry, because people are accustomed to seeing people sitting quietly as the teacher talks, right? No, this is a party. I mean, they are arguing, they are laughing. I mean, it's amazing. I mean, they're engaged. Nobody can sit back, and then each person has a role. We use this entrepreneurship theme. So one person's project manager, one person is the technologist, one person is the provocateur. They've got these roles, and they each have a chance to play all the roles over the semester. The students hate it the first half of the semester. I get more emails from freshmen saying, I got a 5 in AP chemistry, why must I do this? I don't need anybody. Well, that statement speaks volumes itself, because we're trying to prepare people for the real world of science and corporate. People have to learn to work in teams with people they don't know. Or they'll write saying, I want to work with somebody from my high school. No. You know, they want to be with people like themselves. And so we just mix it up, and each person has a chance to present, to play these other roles. And the results, and then we do a lot with analytics. The article I wrote in EDUCAUSE talks about this, of how you look at trends across periods within the semester with different faculty members, and then a lot of emphasis on supportive faculty in professional development. But these are cohorts, and they get to know each other so well, they become a study group right there, you see, and it moves from there. The other point, though, is that we have really worked with just students in general, and some of the things you're doing in the living, learning communities to form groups who become supportive of each other in different ways, and have faculty over in the residence halls a lot. And so and now we have taken it from chemistry to all first-year science, and now I'm going to be using this money from Carnegie to do it in engineering and in some of the arts and humanities. We did it in psychology, and it worked well. In every case, as we've done the analytics, looking at the data, we have seen students performing at much higher levels. And the most important question is this: so how does the rigor in these kinds of courses, the course redesign, compare with the other? The rigor is actually more impressive now. We've actually taken the standard up, and yet we've had about a 50% increase in the number of chemistry and biochemistry majors over the past 5 years, just because of this redesign, professional development. Now, the question you might ask is, well, how many faculty involved? I would say probably in these departments a good 50%. Some people still want to do it the old-fashioned way for certain courses, but what is amazing to me is the more success we have, the more colleagues are saying, well, maybe I ought to look at this. Maybe I ought to look at this, all right? Because what we do is to give people a chance to see how students perform, and it's not about, the most important point is to create an environment where you're not pointing fingers at anybody, you're not trying to embarrass anybody, you're wanting people to have conversations. Because, CEO friends will say, well, Freeman, you're the president, just make them do it. You're right. And I always say, I want my job, all right? You don't make anybody do anything at a university. You can't make students do it. They can go, okay, and go and drop the course, right? Right? The only way something works at a university is if people really think it should. And the best you can do, it seems to me, is just to create a climate that gets people to open their minds and think about the possibility. It takes time, okay? Other questions, please. Yes. Mm-hmm.
Personal and social responsibility.
Yes.
And the things that you did at UMBC, what are some of the strategies for nurturing personal and social responsibility in your students?
It's a great question. It's an excellent question. How do we just get people to think about it? I have found that giving new students a chance, again, this sounds trite, but to hear the stories of successful students and students who are not successful can be eye-opening. When a freshman hears a sophomore say, I came from the same background as you had. I had A's in high school. I came in thinking I was the smartest person in the classroom. I was used to getting these A's. I got here, I was studying 2 hours a night, and I was barely making a C. All right? And once I'd gotten a C in the first half of the semester, it was over. Because in most math and science courses, if you're just barely making it in the first half, you're not going to A and B in the second half, because one thing builds on another. One of the strategies we use that you'll appreciate is that, I'll tell you this, for any student who wants to go to med school or wants to go on to grad school in science, if you get C's in the first year of science, it's almost impossible. Think about it. Anybody who knows, because you don't get a strong background, for people who are not in math and science, imagine trying to do longhand division if you didn't learn subtraction and multiplication well. And everything builds on another thing. So helping students understand how important that first year experience is, that you can't wait until midterm to say, I'll start studying now, for example. But then really having students listen to some students who bombed out. Amazing, in small groups to talk about that can be amazingly helpful. The other thing is that you're doing some of this, the early warning systems. We do a lot with technology to get to students and have conversations even within the first six weeks when we see their problems. We're really looking, because that first period sets the tone for every student, very much so. And then in the residence halls, we actually have students who are there to help when they see freshmen or new students watching too much TV or playing too many games. The typical, in our culture, usually you say, well, that's that person's responsibility, so you leave them alone. But if people take ownership of each other, then it means when they see they're playing around too much, they have a conversation with them to say, you're getting into trouble right now. It's amazing how we've got student leaders, and this is why it's so important to have student leaders here. The best news I can tell you is that our student government group, undergrad and grad, made retention and success of students their top priority for years now. And they give a part of their money that usually goes for entertainment to help the university. So they're helping buy furniture. They're helping to renovate space. They have a major competition entitled Improve It. And this was about 7 or 8 years ago. Student leaders said, students sometimes can just sit around and complain about things. Well, suppose we gave them an opportunity to improve some problem involving the academic experience at UMBC. And so students have the opportunity to write proposals and get up to $25,000. And one of the criteria is to have a faculty member and a staff member involved in the team of whatever they want to do. And it has been amazing to see some of the ideas they came up with. They wanted more study space. They said it's antiquated to say you can't eat and drink in the library. We want a big space in the library that's 24 hours that allows us to eat and to have more group work and to be louder as we're working. The understanding is you're studying, but you know, we're tired of people in old-fashioned ways saying you got and nothing to drink because we want to eat and drink, you know. And it was just, they said, let's be wild about it. We want to be able to eat and drink while we study. Revolutionary in the library, right? you know. So getting my librarians to kind of open up some, and we've now devoted a whole big floor, and you'll see it's like a studying party all the time. But the students said, we'll give you $30,000 to help with the furniture, okay? And we'll do that for several years. So getting them to take some responsibility even for the space, let alone, and then getting them to take responsibility for each other, but having them talk about their experiences can make a big difference. The same thing we found with women faculty when talking about in the science. Having them talk about their experiences, to hear what they had to say was very interesting. When women said, well, if I talk about my family in my department, my kids, people think I'm not a serious scientist. Yet I hear the older guys talking about the problems they're having with their parents. You see what I'm saying? You know, and you know, so it's just getting people to discuss these issues to see perceptions. It's amazing how it helps to shape the culture of a place. So robust dialogue about the issues can lead to people rethinking their role in this responsibility.
Hello, Dr. Freeman. My name is Nick. I'm a student here. My question is, you had stated earlier, students that work full-time and attend school full-time have on average a GPA of 2.2. Okay. Well, limited in success, students that are in that area, how are they able to better themselves?
Right.
I'm a student that works 70 hours a week.
Right. And how many credits are you taking?
Currently 11. Last semester was 16. Previous was 17.
What's your major?
Biomedical sciences and marine bio.
See, and that's, you see, it's hard, and this is where the university needs to have a very hard discussion. We say, we make it, in the report, the National Academy's report says, we need to find ways of giving more financial support to students in the sciences so that they will not be working all those hours, because it is usually impossible to work full-time, take a full load in biomedical sciences, and have Bs and better. It's just almost impossible for any human being to do it. When it happens, the person is just pure genius, quite frankly. It's because it's just that, and I know that from just looking at a lot of students. So what I would say is that there's several things. Number one, what we've worked to do is to find funding from a lot of grants for students of all races to be able to work in labs, have experiences on campus. If you're working a lot of hours in a lab and you're in science, it's a very different thing than when you're doing something completely different from science. You know what I mean? Because people, if you're working around scientists, they're going to understand what you're going through. They can help you out. You can ask questions, and it makes all the difference in the world. And I would say any campus that is successful in helping students to succeed in science is finding ways to give them financial support or employment on campus involving science so they can have work that's related to the major. Then it can work. Otherwise, a really smart student like you, and I mean smart as a hard worker, I commend you, first of all, for what you're trying to do. I really do. And it's obvious you're intellectually curious. So I want to commend you. I want you to feel good about that. I don't want you to feel badly when you end up not doing as well as you might do because you're working so many hours, because, quite frankly, it is not humanly possible in biochemistry, for example, to work 16 credits, do 16 credits and work 70 hours on the outside and stay healthy. You get my point? When I've seen it done, somebody's actually gotten sick from that. That's a part of the issue. So the question is, what kind of support can you get? What kind of loan can you take out, depending on what you want to do? Especially if you're talking about, let me just say this, if you're talking about either going to medical school or grad school, you're going to have at least Bs in those science courses.
I have a second part to that question.
Sure.
For students that are struggling that much, if they have a GPA of 2.2, there's so many limitations onto the funding they can get because of their grades. how are they able to raise their grades in order to get that funding so they don't have to work so much?
Right,
The thing
right,
is they have to go into a debt and
Right.
take loans to the point where they can't afford to not stop working.
Let
And
me
they
ask
have
you-
to drop out.
Let me say that the 2.2 was meant metaphorically, not saying they have precisely a 2.2, first of all, but they're getting C's often. Here's what I want you to think about. The question is, what is your goal? If your goal is to go to med school or grad school, typically you're going to have at least B's in your science courses, okay? Now, a number of our students, we do limit the number of times students can take courses, but we have worked to help some students when they have not done well in the first year to retake some of those courses. Because here's the point. If you've gotten C's in general chemistry, it's hard to get a B in organic chemistry. And you're going to do one of two things, either retake the course or work with the faculty member to figure out what are the concepts you didn't grasp completely to build up your background so you can make it at that next level. The other part is this. Let me just say it to you. If there are jobs in the area, there are jobs in biotech in my area where students who have C+ averages can get a job with a bachelor's degree. But if I were you, this is where a part of your report here that talks about counseling is very important. You want to know, this is the question you want to ask. If you've got a 2.5, for example, you want to ask in the counseling center, what are the kinds of jobs I can get in biotech with a 2.5? Because there are jobs like that that you can get. It does mean you're thinking about how many courses you're taking in relationship to how many hours you're working on the outside. It does mean that. Sometimes I have advised students based on their grades and the fact that they've got many more very difficult courses to take while working hard, I've advised them to change their majors. Just being realistic about it. Because if you still have a lot of really hard courses to take, the further up you go up in that ladder, the harder the courses get, and the more you're working on the outside, the harder it will be to even get that C. And if that is the case, then you got to look at positives and negatives. And in that case, given that you've got the confidence to get up and ask a hard question, you can do many things. There are ways that you can use your technical background in business careers and be able to finish with higher grades and do all kinds of things that may involve science or health policy or biotech without being a scientist. So you need a chance to talk with counselors about the relationship between credits taken, how you've done, how much work is left, and what your vision of yourself will be. Okay? Good question, sir. Very good. I see right there. I'm sorry. Right. You start with, great question was, we have a smaller student body. You know, we have been pushed to grow, and our approach has been, when the state can give me more funding, we'll grow more. We don't want to grow, quite frankly, and not have the support services we need, all right? And here's the point. And there's a larger campus where people can go in my state if they want to. We like our mid-sized place. But here's the point. Cohort groups can start with smaller groups, okay? And it is amazing to me that a lot of the cohort work can be done without extra money. But setting up a structure where you have 5 to 10 people who begin meeting regularly, studying together, all right, looking at best practices involving group study. Most campuses have not taught students how to work in groups. Most serious students will say, I don't want to work in a group because they'll start talking about other things. I don't have time for that. We teach students in our programs how to work in groups. First of all, you don't come to the group until you've tried to do the work on your own. When you come to the group, you have a responsibility to say what you know and what you don't know because you've already tried to work. You're not looking at it fresh. You've really tried to do all you can on your own. You know what you know and what you don't know. You've got good questions, but you're ready to help other people with the parts you know. Secondly, you teach them in groups that you have set aside 5 minutes or whatever to talk about other things when you want to relax for a half hour. I mean, you work for an hour, take a 5-minute break, whatever, but you develop the discipline in the group that you focus on the work, all right? And you set aside a certain amount of time. And then third, you learn how to organize your time to get through certain material, given whatever time frame you have. The group has to be efficient enough that the members feel at the end of the session it was worthwhile. And I'm saying universities that are really talking about group work will use some of the best practices and research on how to prepare and teach a group of students to work together. And then besides the group, the academic work, the other piece for us in cohorts is in building enough trust that students can talk about the good, the bad, and the ugly of their performance. So in we will have different cohorts meeting, and then we have all of the people in a certain program meet, and we'll have sophomores talking about their experiences with freshmen. But I'll ask certain questions. For example, who can tell me about a course in which you did surprisingly well, where you really understood the concepts and, you know, and what was it that was fascinating about the work? And then we'll say, okay, how many of you bombed out on the last test, on the test? Now, in most universities, if you ask students how many bombed out on the test, everybody looks around. Nobody raises a hand because it's just not cool to tell people when you didn't do well, right? But in a cohort, there has to be enough trust that you can say, I didn't do well on that test. How did you do? Can you help me out? A willingness to receive help and to give help and trust. It's those kinds of factors that will be really important. And then getting people of like mind together. So you can have a cohort with 5 people, 10 people, 15 people. We have a Center for Women in Information Technology because, as all of you know, the percent of women in computer science in America has gone down substantially the past maybe 15 years. One of the reasons is schools stopped focusing on it. So I bet you the same thing is true with your campus that I see in my campus. Fewer than 20% of the students in your computer science courses are probably women. It's a real issue. And so we have CWIT Scholars, Center for Women in IT, and those women work together. Now, interestingly, there are guys in the program for women. And it's a big joke because, they're supposed to be there because they want to help understand those issues, which is very good. Some just like having a chance to be around a lot of women. But it's okay. They're learning, all right? It's the human experience, right? Come on. But the point is that, and the guys learn, though, about the issues women face. I'll give you an example. Faculty, some of my women students say, well, if there are 40 in a class and there are 5 women, and the professor sets up 5 groups, 8 per group, the typical response that the guy will use, and it's usually a male professor in mechanical engineering or whatever, let alone computer science, is to put 1 woman per group. So listen, you see what I'm saying? 1 woman per group. And so finally the women said, I was having one of these focus groups, and they said, why must we always be the only one in the group? Why don't you use us as a group and put 1 guy in the group, let him see what it feels like to be the only guy in the group? You know, we hadn't thought about it. The men, you get my point? We hadn't thought about it. The guy meant well. He was saying, well, women got to get used to being in a company where often that won't be allowed. But the point that they were making was very valid, that sometimes you got to mix it up and also give women a chance to be around other people to have those experiences. So the point is course can be any size, okay? Other questions? Yes, uh-huh. Mm-hmm. Mm.
One of the things that I try to do is put freshmen in touch with people who are doing what they want to do.
Yes.
Or also to put them in touch with faculty, because
Yes.
what I've read shows that students who have contact with faculty
Yes.
outside of class, even if they're not the faculty members who are teaching them,
Yes.
have a much higher retention rate.
Yes, yes.
To my mind, the problem at USF is not faculty buy-in. I've never approached a professor and asked them to come and speak to our students and had them say no. To me, the biggest issue is supporting our faculty in other ways so that they can come and help the students. They want to help the whole student. It's just that the other pressures that we're facing, you know, with publish and perish and these sorts of things, or perish, excuse me.
That was a Freudian slip on the part, I'm sure.
Yeah, that might have been Freudian. I'm exhausted. How do you recommend that the administration support the faculty so that they can do the job that they want to do
Sure.
for the students?
It's a great question. Her question has to do with a lot of faculty would like to be more involved, but they're thinking about what are the rewards, right? The approach we used was to the pressures that they are facing with the publishing, which is a very important part of it. I mean, for us, most important, we have made undergraduate research a theme across disciplines, Many of our students publish with faculty in referee journals, many, beginning in the sophomore year, okay? We have 2 undergraduate journals that are run by undergraduates. One is called Bartleby in the Arts, and the other is more in the social sciences, UMBC Review, because our science colleagues, students, are working with science and engineering faculty in those referee journals. But I bring that up to say this. So the first thing we've done, and particularly for faculty who are working to get tenure, is to try to protect them, first of all, quite frankly, not to do too much. I've had to say that to younger faculty, to women faculty, to faculty of color. You don't want to spend too much time, because a lot of times, if a faculty member is of color or a woman, often we find the research shows that students will come to them more often to ask for help. The guy's busy, he doesn't write, but the woman is there and supportive. And we've had to say, you want to be really careful about how much time you spend listening to the problems of students. Now, students, what I mean by this is this, that what the junior faculty should do, we say, is to get to know the student well enough to get them to the right person. Because you've got great advisors and counselors all over the place that can be supportive of those kinds of, so not to spend too much time that way, because you just don't have it. You can spend hours and hours and hours. I've had junior faculty say, I'm spending 10, 15 hours a week listening to the problems of students. No, you shouldn't be doing that right now. No. You can help the student by getting them to a professional to get that help, right? And yet show that you care. Secondly, I really do, what helped us a lot was to bring together focus groups. This is one of our things, bringing together focus groups of faculty, of staff, of students to hear what they say. So we have had many conversations with faculty from different disciplines at different ranks to say, what would make the difference? What can we do to help you with your pressures as you look at what the priorities of the university are? And they've had some amazing suggestions. For example, we do give certain awards for working with students. Number 2, we do talk about clarity of expectations for tenure. We do look at how many committees people serve on if they're doing other kinds of things. We want to balance it out so they're not being overly burdened, quite frankly, with one type of activity or another. And then most important, for helping students to get faculty to get the tenure, the student success to me is almost like the faculty success. The worst thing I think that can happen is you bring faculty in, they've got great hopes, they do their best, and they don't get tenure. To me, that is a failure of the university. And it's also, quite frankly, a waste of money, right? Because you've invested in this person, right? And it's just morally. So you want to do everything you can. Now, in some cases, people just don't take there have been cases where people have said, well, I don't believe in doing all that research. Well, we have to say, well, why'd you come here when you knew that was the expectation, right? But in terms of being fair, we want to make sure we do everything to help that faculty member so they can help those students beyond the 6 years. Right? And so listening to the voices of the faculty to say, what are the ways in which we can help? How much should we be involved with students to be supportive without getting to the point where we can't do it all? And it's understanding the balance between those things that I think is very important, very, very important. So group work, listening, even for staff members. Let me tell you the most exciting thing I heard. I have focus groups with my staff, with people, with physical plant people, for example. And they have this big breakfast where they want people to come over and see what they're doing. All the guys working on the grounds and everything, and they cook a mean breakfast. They really do. Stuff I'm not supposed to eat at all. But I'll ask the question, so what do you like about UMBC? And the best answer I ever heard was from a guy who got his GED while working at UMBC. He would go to school, and he said, what I like is that you all see us as a part of the education of students. I said, well, tell me what you mean. He said, I don't have I just barely have a high school diploma, but I have a Ph.D. in life. And he said, a lot of times students on campus just need somebody to be there for them when I'm working on the grounds, and they'll just come over and talk to me. And Doc, you've shown us that it's important for all of us to look into the faces of each other. Because he said, I worked at another place, and they never even looked at me. But here, I'm an older person, I've got a family, I have kids, and sometimes I can just listen to a student. He said, and what I really like about UMBC is that students are serious, and they also are taught to be nice to everybody. Now, to me, that spoke volumes about the values of our campus, about everybody on campus understanding we're there to educate, to lift people up, to support students, and it's that kind of approach, I think, listening to what they say, that can make it. It never would have occurred to me. He even knew the SAT of the campus. He was very proud of that. I was amazed. It was just really great. And he says, I tell people, you got to have at least 1,200 to get into UMBC. It was great to have the grounds persons in there, right? It was incredible. Other questions? Yes.
Is it? Hi, my name is Anais Sori. I'm an alumna from USF. I graduated in 2007 and later got my master's online with National University. Just to give you my story. Since
But let me just say this. You don't know how unusual it is to hear somebody use the right alumna. Give her a hand for that, would you please? I am always telling, I always have people say, I'm an alumni of UMBC. I say, no, you're an alumna. I'm very impressed with that. It's my mother, the English teacher, coming out. Go right ahead.
I studied English.
It's very clear.
I'm the first to graduate in my family as well. And my parents immigrated from Dominican Republic, so they didn't have the experience as far as studying in America or the career experience or wherever to give me the advice that I needed. So while I was here at USF, I spent a lot of time with my advisors, and I spent a lot of time later on during my junior and senior year at the Career Center. So that, for me, was really important that I had this support. So I just wanted to say thank you to everyone that's here, because as a graduate, I didn't have this, or I didn't see this happening when I was in school. What I did
Give her a hand for thanking you folks, would you? I mean, that doesn't always happen. That's very nice.
What I did to be more competitive, though, because I was interested in marketing communications while I was an undergraduate, was many internships, all the way through the point to after graduation. So I did a lot of internships and spent a lot of time doing that research. But what I wanted to know, I had two questions. So this first one is, what advice would you have for students now? Because when I graduated in 2007, it wasn't impossible to find a job, but it was definitely not as easy. But it's even harder now. So if you have any advice for students that are entering the workforce now, I myself and also trying to find a new position myself. But advice that you would have for students to be more competitive in entering the workforce.
Great question. There's several things. Number one, the more experience you've had in working, and this is to the guy who was talking to me about from biomedical sciences over on that side. The good news about working is that you really do develop a lot of skills that can be transferable and used in all kinds of jobs. I mean, I do believe that one can learn from any kind of job a lot about working with people, group work, and those kinds of things. That's number one. Number two, to make sure whatever work you do your best so that when you get the recommendations, they are very good. But number three, I will say this. I think that we have to teach students that sometimes you have to move from an area to find what you really want, even if you want to come back to that area. I have to say that to my students sometimes. I mean, we've got a lot of jobs of certain types in that area, but there are other jobs. A lot of companies come to us and say, we want people to move to the West Coast with Seattle, whatever, and some will say, okay, others will say, no, I want something right here. And we've got to teach students, no, we love family, but sometimes you have to go away and come back. So being flexible. The other point is, I don't think it's as important to say specifically what you want to do. You want to get as much experience as possible. Too often I hear new students or new graduates, bachelor's or master's, saying, I want to do something, and it's very specific. And the companies and places will say, well, we don't have anything like that. You want to be asking the questions, what are the opportunities that I speak well? I know that I am an alumna of USC. I've got the right attitude. You want to make sure you have all your strengths there to talk about. You want them to be impressed with the fact that you can interact with confidence and in a positive way. And you'd be surprised if you stay broad in looking, you're fine. Don't worry about the fact that it's not exactly the job you wanted. Get the experience. Remember, all of you are going to have 4 or 5 careers over the next 40, 50 years. I have to tell my students all the time, stop being so specific when you talk, because you rule yourself out if they don't have exactly that. Just be broader in the perspective. The final thing I would say is spend a lot of time in the Career Center. I tell my students all the time, it's one thing to use the technology and email and the electronic approach. Nothing takes the place of face-to-face. Nothing takes the place of, because I see 100 resumes every couple of days just passing through the office, right? But when you can get to know people in your Career Center well enough, then you can get them working with you as a partner. It's amazing what face-to-face interaction will do. They understand your challenges, they understand your strengths, they can give you feedback. Students, I'll tell you this, for whether you're looking for a job or you're looking for the best education, one of the things I say to all these cohorts and to all of my students, learn to be thick-skinned. the best people, the best educated people, those who are well educated, understand that they can only be better when they can receive constructive criticism with comfort. Well-educated people, people who want to be better and better, want to know not just how well they've done, but where they can improve. So ask for feedback. And for all the students in the room, I would say that, for young faculty especially, it helps when you say, give me the real deal. Don't sugarcoat it. Tell me what I'm not doing well, I mean, what I need to do better in, because that's the only way you can grow and develop, okay? Somebody else, yes, Last question.
I just had one quick thing.
Yes.
Speaking of having conversations, I've been tweeting everything you've been saying,
right.
And I just missed a quote. Can you say one more time one with student success has everything to do with, what did you say that was?
I have no idea. What did I say? Alzheimer's person. But I really do believe with our attitudes about receiving constructive criticism. That's the idea, that you want to be tough-skinned, not thin-skinned. You don't want to get your feelings hurt. I have to tell, let me be very frank about this. I work with my young women of all races when they're going off to big research labs, because in medicine and science, people can be real rough and tough and quite frankly, no people skills. A lot of times, not all, but a lot. And so I'm saying prepare for toughness. And I tell young women this, speak up, because women have softer voices. People will respect you more when you project. If you're too soft, they'll walk over you and not even listen to you. And secondly, when they give you that advice, suck it up. Suck it up. You don't want to be crying all the time. No, I'm very serious. It's very important. I mean, you talk to my women's scientists have told me, we've got to teach young women to deal with it. Suck it up. It's very important. I mean, it sounds like a simple matter or like I'm being cruel. No, I want my young women to be tough enough to deal with a world that is not exactly soft. You get my point? I mean, so it's important to be able to laugh, be upbeat, be tough-skinned, and just know if somebody's not nice to you, that's their problem. That's not about you. That's their problem. Just get what you can intellectually from them. You get me? Very important. All right, last question.
I'm sorry I'm finishing this because I'm sure there are a lot of people who still have questions. To help answer the question that she just asked, I wrote down what you said. You said the keys to student success are attitudes, values, and expectations of students, faculty, and staff.
That's exactly right. Very good. Give her a hand for that. I'm impressed. She was listening. I love it. I love it.
My question's a little bit different. Here at USF, we have a lot of science students who take multiple science courses, which include a large lecture of more than 100 students at a time.
Yes.
Those lectures also usually include a smaller breakout section. And if we added what you're calling as a cohort or a small student group, that would be yet another tax on their time. Heaven forbid you're a biomedical engineering student. That means you have biology, chemistry, and engineering.
Right.
So you're taking a large lecture, a breakout, and then a cohort meeting. Did you do anything to change the scheduling practices of those kind of courses on your campus? And if so, what did you do, and how did you get faculty and administration to buy in?
Right, and this is where a climate of experimentation is very important. We are redesigning right now a range of courses because we had the same thing in some of the science courses. So we have less lecturing, for example, and more we go into this course redesign, which involves group work. Keep in mind that even when the students have the lecture and then the group discussion, they still take time to study at some point, right? And so this would be a lot of the time, not all of it, but some of the time of their studying, working in a group. And the other point is that students in science and engineering often are discouraged because their friends who are not in science and engineering usually don't work as hard. They're smart, but it's the nature of the disciplines is what I'm saying. I can miss some time in a course in humanities and social sciences. If I read and think well and I get the notes, I'll be okay. I may not be the best, but I'll be okay. But if you miss 3 days of my calculus course or my differential equations, it's over. Because you can't just read the notes and get it. You've got to be there. And similarly, in the work, my science and engineering kids will say, when my friends was in another major, they went out and partied, they got an 8 on a Monday, I stayed and studied, and I got a C. So there's a feeling of being ordinary in science and engineering that we have to work on. And the group work can help students commiserate and pump each other up, and you need that, you really do. My challenge to you is to go back and say, okay, what percent of our students are white, black, Asian, Hispanic, Native American, what percent of every group starting off in engineering will actually graduate in engineering? What are the backgrounds of those students? What are their attitudes? What can faculty say? So knowing the situations can make all the difference in the world. That would be, and then experimenting with ways of trying a cohort and to see what would happen. And then looking at best practices. I get the report that we did on expanding minorities ended up being a report for everybody. Because the same things that would help students of color would help students in general, quite frankly. Very, very important. Okay, I want you to learn this with me. This is about building community. So I want you to memorize this with me. It says thoughts, words, actions, habits, character, destiny. Say it with me. Thoughts, words, actions, habits, character, destiny. One more time. Thoughts, words, actions, habits, character, destiny. Here we go. Watch your thoughts, they become your... Okay, now we got to say this like we really mean it now, all right? All right, come on now, USF. Come on now. Wait a minute. All right. It's thoughts, words, actions, habits, character, destiny. Again, thoughts, words, actions, habits, character, destiny. Here we go. Watch your thoughts, they become your. Watch your words, they become your. Watch your actions, they become your. Watch your habits, they become your. Watch your character, it becomes your. Thank you all very much. Thank you.
What a treat that was, folks. Ladies and gentlemen, that was an awesome and fantastic event, quite historic. Thank you again, Dr. Hrabowski. Let's stay on schedule, take a 10-minute break. Restrooms are out that way and around. There's also some drinks, refreshments. We'll regroup in 10 minutes at your tables for the next part of the conference. Thank you very much. If you could make your way back to your table, we're going to proceed into the next stage. We want you to get at your tables so that you can have your round table sessions. Each one of you will have an opportunity to engage in a discussion of specific topics that have been assigned to you. Every table has a facilitator whom you've probably met by now. If not, please make the introductions. And these facilitators will share discussion guidelines and help keep the conversation on track. We're running a little bit behind, but it's good. Let's take 30 to 45 minutes for the dialogue, and then I'll come back on stage for a wrap-up. And we'll be circulating around as you're having your conversations.
What have you seen faculty do to contribute to student academic success that can be adopted by other faculty?
Well, being a music education major, our classes are a lot smaller.
Okay.
One of my professors, the choir professor, he actually takes time for us to talk about each other and the different things that are going on in our lives. And it gives an opportunity for him to invest in us, and then also for us to invest in each other. Because it's something where we work together. So that's something that, going off of what the speaker talked about, the cohorts, maybe having that, oh yeah, well, having us work together in the cohorts, the smaller groups, being able to focus on each other, and then being able to get each other excited for what we're doing. Like, I think that's been a great part of my degree.
My name is Ben Stephen. I'm the operations manager for the USF bookstore. Been here about 4 years or so. Really work with more students than faculty. So one of the things that we do at the bookstore is really try to work around. I know a lot of students have to work while they're in school, so we try to work around their class schedule, work with them so they can have a job as well as go to school as well.
And one great activity that we did, you guys remember we did this like Lego activity where we had these folders up and one person was building a structure out of Legos, and then without the other person responding, they had to describe the structure they were building, and the other person had to build this structure. And one of the things that we were discovering was that some terms that seem second nature to us are not second nature to a student. So for example, an incoming freshman might not know what a registrar is or what their function is. So defining terms and clarifying clarifying processes and knowing that all students are on the same page as far as what's cross-enrollment versus a transient enrollment and things like that, because students could be asking for things and thinking they're being heard when they might not even be asking them correct.
Right. I know one of the things I did with my course I started doing it this semester was because you can do the FaceTime now on the computer system, and so I do a lot of video conferencing now. You know what, I got on my own program, it's called Fuse conferencing system, and you can share your desktop with the students as well, but now it enables me to communicate, and I'll meet with some students at 1 o'clock in the morning over the computer because they work days, they study at night, and so my schedule is kind of, well, I don't know about that, but it just, it works out really well, and so the computer actually, it gives a lot more versatility in time, because with online classes, I can't predict when they may be working or when they may be studying, and so the online conferencing really has enabled me to have a little more communication that I didn't have before. So, yes.
One of the things that we do in the Management Certificate Program is we post the bios of the coaches from like the Tampa Bay Coaching Society so that the participants can go look at the bios for that very purpose to see which ones may have had or have experience in their particular area of interest. And then they make the contact. They hook up, talk for an hour, and they always have the option that let's pursue this, or maybe this isn't a good fit, let's do something else. But that, I like the idea of establishing that kind of, let's meet and talk, learn a little bit more, talk about what we want to accomplish, what some of your goals are.
It could be that we don't write it correctly. It could be that the student look at it and then don't get the meaning. We know that each people has a different level of understanding of certain kind of things, maybe some terms. And especially me, I was a student here. I just graduated from my Ph.D. and I understand that how difficult it is for me as an international student to really completely comprehend what the teachers, what the professors are trying to say to me through email, to write. Sometimes I have to check, is it correct? Right. And then that's why the face-to-face is really good. Because it will overcome that kind of challenge. However, it doesn't mean that it's eliminated that way. It's always there. And bigger challenge for me is how can we be on the same page? How can we be on the same page, students and professors, so that we have the same understanding, and then at the end of the session when we communicate, then, okay, we find a solution, and we know how to do it. I think that's the biggest challenge for us.
And I'm not going to make my requirements lesser than they should be, because I know how complex and rich and challenging their lives are, but I'm going to acknowledge that what I'm asking of them is serious business and the stakes are high, and that there's all this other stuff that they're having to learn to manage too. So I spend a lot of time talking with them about how do we manage to, if this is the only time in our lives where we actually get to really live inside our minds, how do we manage that and family and work and all of our other classes? Just today we were talking about the fact that from here on out, for the rest of the semester, we're all going to be having mini meltdowns. But their meltdowns, I was like, your guys' meltdowns are very different from mine right now. Your meltdowns are a nature where you've spent so many weeks learning content in courses, and now you've got all these assignments and all these deadlines, and you're trying to figure out how to turn all that information into knowledge. I'm like, if I think about it, that's incredibly overwhelming and daunting a task to do. And you're doing it not just for my class, but 3 or 4 other classes as well. And so every time you feel really overwhelmed, go in a closet and scream, or take a deep breath, or my favorite one is get a glass bottle and find a brick wall and throw the glass at it. Cleaning it up afterwards.
I look at the cost. For instance, number of advisors we can afford to have is very small. So that's the cost and the benefit analysis we need to do.
One of the initiatives for student success is that the provost put money to hire more academic advisors. Now, there still aren't as many as we need, but there are a few more than what we had before.
So we need more.
Well, sorry to interrupt the conversations, but we are past the time allotted, and I just hate to end when we're having such good conversations. I want to thank you all for attending the conference this year and contributing to the development of these best practice documents. The facilitators will be typing something up for us, and the committee will then be pulling them all together and crafting a document that reflects the recommendations that you all have developed. And what we're going to do is then put that in front of the Student Success Council, have them consider it, and we want to post it and talk about next steps. In this new phase of student success, we want to focus more on implementation. And while we have to continue working on institutionalization and changing the culture and all these things, it is a new phase in the student success movement. And Dr. Herbowski, I think, has really inspired and informed us about the work ahead. And he inspired us in large part with the passion that he brings to this. So it helps all of us, I think, when we get tired, and we get tired often, to think of just how important the work is that we're doing. And before you leave, though, please be sure to fill out the Your Opinion Matters tearaway that's in your conference program. Be sure to take those other items with you, that nice pen with the thumb drive and pointer and the report. As for the tearaway, you can leave them right on the table. We'll pick them up. But thank you all again. I'm not sure that we can top this year's keynote speaker, but we're sure going to try again next year. Thank you all for attending, and have a good evening.